Kethvar felt his stomach drop as the warning lights flashed red across his control panel. The small scout ship shook violently as it fell for the poisonous clouds surrounding Kepler 438b. This wasn't supposed to happen. His mission had been simple: fly in, take pictures of enemy positions, and get out. Now everything was going wrong. The navigation computer made a horrible grinding noise and went completely dark. Kethvar's four hands moved frantically over the controls, trying to pull the ship out of its deadly dive. Nothing worked. The steering was completely gone. Through the thick orange clouds below, he could see jagged black rocks getting bigger and bigger. "This is Scout 7 to base," he spoke into the communicator with his deep, rumbling voice. "I'm going down. Repeat, I'm going down." Only static answered him back. Kethvar had been flying for over 20 years. He'd survived 3 major wars and dozens of smaller battles. His purple-scaled skin bore the scars of countless fights. But this felt different. This felt final. He gripped the sides of his pilot seat and prepared for the worst. The impact was worse than anything he'd ever experienced. The ship hit the rocky ground at tremendous speed and bounced twice before sliding into a deep canyon. Metal screamed and tore apart around him. Sparks flew everywhere. The smell of burning electronics filled the air. When everything finally stopped moving, Kethvar found himself hanging upside down in his seat. His protective exoskeleton, which had saved his life so many times before, was cracked down the middle. Warm green blood dripped from several cuts on his arms and face. Every breath sent sharp pain through his ribs. He tried to reach the emergency beacon, but his left arm wouldn't move properly. Something was definitely broken. The communicator was completely destroyed, crushed under a piece of the ceiling that had fallen during the crash. Smoke was starting to fill the small cockpit. Kethvar managed to unbuckle himself and crawl out of the wreckage. The planet's air was thin and smelled like sulfur. His breathing mask had cracked, but it was still working for now. He looked around at the desolate landscape. Nothing but rocks and dust in every direction. The orange sky looked sick and unnatural. In the distance, he could hear the low humming sound of Vorthak patrol vehicles. His enemies were already searching for him. They'd find the crash site soon enough. The smoking wreckage would be visible for miles. Kethvar tried to stand but fell back down immediately. His right leg was badly injured. He could barely walk, let alone run or fight. His weapon had been thrown somewhere in the crash, and he couldn't find it. Even if he could, what good would one rifle do against an entire patrol? He thought about his family back on the Zelani homeworld. His mate, Vishka, who always worried when he went on dangerous missions. His 2 younglings who were just starting school. They would never know what happened to him. The Galactic Coalition would simply mark him as missing in action and move on. That was how it always worked in the Coalition military. Individual soldiers didn't matter. If you got left behind, you stayed left behind. It was considered wasteful to risk more lives trying to save one person. Every species in the galaxy followed the same cold logic. Resources were limited. Sacrifices had to be made. Kethvar had always accepted this reality. He'd even left behind wounded comrades himself when the situation demanded it. It was just how war worked. But now, sitting in his own blood on this hostile planet, waiting to die, he wondered if there might be a better way. The humming sounds were getting closer. Soon the Vorthak would find him. They wouldn't kill him quickly. His species and theirs had been enemies for centuries. They would make him suffer first, try to get information about Coalition positions and plans. He knew he wouldn't be able to resist their torture methods for very long. Kethvar reached for the small poison capsule that every Coalition soldier carried. It would be quick and painless, better than what the Vorthak had planned for him. He held the tiny device in his trembling hand and closed his 4 eyes. But something made him hesitate. Maybe it was the thought of his family. Maybe it was just stubborn pride. He wasn't dead yet. Perhaps he could find somewhere to hide until patrols moved on. It was a slim hope, but it was better than giving up. The injured soldier began crawling toward a cluster of large rocks about 50 meters away. Every movement sent waves of agony through his broken body. His green blood left a trail behind him in the dust. But he kept moving 1 painful inch at a time. Lieutenant Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he led his four-person squad to the narrow canyon. The red dust got into everything on this godforsaken planet. His uniform was already stained orange despite only being on patrol for 2 hours. The heat was unbearable, even with their cooling systems running at full power. "Contact ahead. 2 clicks," whispered Sergeant Rick Taylor through the comm system. He was their best scout, always spotting trouble before anyone else. Morrison raised his hand, signaling the squad to stop. They'd been on Kepler for 38B for only 3 days, and their orders were crystal clear. Stay hidden, watch the enemy, and report back. No fighting unless absolutely necessary. The brass wanted intelligence, not heroes. "What do you see, Rick?" Morrison asked quietly. "Smoke. Lots of it. Something big went down hard." Through his binoculars, Morrison could make out a thick black column rising from somewhere deeper in the canyon. It definitely wasn't natural. Someone or something had crashed, and recently, too. The smoke was still thick and dark. "Could be one of ours," suggested Private Danny Brooks. He was the youngest member of their squad, barely 22, and still eager for action. "Doubt it," replied Corporal Lisa Martinez, adjusting her weapon. "All our birds are accounted for. This is something else." Morrison made a decision that would change everything. "We check it out. Stay sharp, stay quiet. If it's a Vorthack trap, we back out fast." The squad moved carefully through the rocky terrain. Morrison had been leading soldiers for 8 years, ever since the humans first made contact with alien civilizations. He'd learned to trust his instincts, and right now something felt off about this whole situation. As they got closer, the smell of burning fuel and melted metal filled the air. Whatever had crashed was definitely not human technology. The wreckage looked organic somehow, like it had been grown rather than built. "Jesus," whispered Danny. "Look at the size of that thing." The crashed ship was massive, easily 3 times bigger than any human fighter. Its hull was a strange purple color that seemed to shift and change in the alien sunlight. Steam rose from dozens of cracks in the surface. "Could be a trap," warned Lisa, her rifle trained on the debris. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, ready for anything. Morrison nodded, but something told him this was real. The damage was too extensive, too random to be fake. He'd seen plenty of staged crash sites during his career, and this wasn't one of them. "Rick, Danny, establish a perimeter. Lisa, you're with me." They approached the wreckage slowly. Morrison's heart was pounding, but he kept his breathing steady. Through a large hole in the side of the ship, he could see movement inside. Something was definitely alive in there. "Hello," he called out, feeling slightly ridiculous. "Anyone in there need help?" A low groaning sound came from inside the ship, not mechanical, organic. Someone was hurt, and badly from the sound of it. Morrison squeezed through the hole in the hull, his weapon ready. The inside of the ship was like nothing he'd ever seen. The walls seemed to pull slightly, and strange symbols glowed with a soft blue light. The technology was so advanced it looked like magic. In the center of the cockpit, he found something that made him stop cold. A 7-foot-tall alien warrior was trapped under a piece of twisted metal. The creature had 4 arms, purple scaled skin, and 4 large eyes that were currently staring right at him with obvious shock. Green blood pooled around the alien's massive body. Its breathing was shallow and labored. Without immediate medical attention, this thing was going to die. "Holy hell," Morrison muttered. The alien tried to say something, but only a wet gurgling sound came out. Its 4 eyes never left Morrison's face, as if it couldn't believe what it was seeing. Morrison activated his radio. "This is Recon 7 to base. We've got a situation here." "Go ahead, 7. We found a crashed alien ship with a survivor inside. He's badly injured, requesting immediate medical assistance." There was a long pause. Morrison could practically hear the wheels turning back at headquarters. "Negative, 7. You have your orders. Avoid contact. Gather intelligence only. Not our fight, Lieutenant." Morrison looked down at the dying alien. Those 4 eyes were still watching him, waiting to see what he would do. The creature probably didn't understand English, but it seemed to sense that its fate was being decided. "Sir, this being is critically injured. If we don't help him, he's going to die. That's unfortunate, Lieutenant, but not our problem. Return to your patrol route immediately. Morrison stared at his radio for a long moment. He thought about his orders, about military protocol, about the chain of command. Then he looked back at the alien, who was clearly fighting to stay conscious. In that moment, Jake Morrison made a choice that would echo across the galaxy. Morrison stood frozen in the wreckage, staring down at the wounded alien soldier. His training screamed at him to follow orders and walk away. Every military manual he'd ever read said the same thing. Don't get involved in alien conflicts. The creature wasn't human, wasn't his responsibility, wasn't his problem. But those four large eyes told a different story. Even through the obvious pain, Morrison could see something that transcended species: dignity. The alien wasn't begging or pleading. It was simply waiting, accepting whatever decision Morrison would make. There was a quiet courage there that reminded him of his own soldiers in their darkest moments. Ben, get the med kit. Morrison ordered Sergeant Ben Carter, who was standing guard behind him. Carter's face showed clear confusion. Sir, we have direct orders from command. We're supposed to avoid contact with Dash. I said get the damn kit, Sergeant. The edge in Morrison's voice made it clear this wasn't up for discussion. Carter hesitated for another second, then quickly pulled the medical supplies from his pack. The kit was designed for human injuries, but Carter was smart and resourceful. If anyone could figure out how to help an alien, it would be him. Lisa, take Danny and set up a defensive perimeter around this wreck. Morrison continued, switching to full command mode. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Lisa Martinez nodded and grabbed Private Danny Brooks by the shoulder. You heard him. Move. As his team spread out to secure the area, Morrison knelt beside the injured alien. The creature was massive up close, easily weighing twice as much as any human. Its purple scales were cracked and bleeding green in several places. The most serious wound was a deep gash across its chest where a piece of metal had cut through its armor. Can you understand me? Morrison asked, speaking slowly and clearly. The alien's four eyes focused on him with obvious effort. It made a sound that might have been words, but in a language Morrison had never heard before. The creature was clearly intelligent, clearly trying to communicate. Carter appeared beside them with the medical kit open. Sir, I don't know if our equipment will work on this thing. Its blood is green, its skin is completely different, and I have no idea what its internal structure looks like. Figure it out, Morrison replied simply. Start with stopping the bleeding. Carter went to work with the focused intensity that made him such a good soldier. He used pressure bandages designed for humans, adapting them to fit the alien's much larger frame. The antiseptic seemed to work on the green blood, and the synthetic skin patches bonded surprisingly well to the scaled hide. The alien watched Carter work with growing amazement. It tried to speak again, this time managing what sounded like a question. When Carter gently moved one of its wounded arms to apply a bandage, the alien didn't resist or show aggression. It seemed to understand they were trying to help. Contact. We got movement on the ridge. Danny's voice crackled through the radio from his position 50 meters away. Morrison grabbed his rifle and moved to where he could see the canyon rim. Through his scope, he spotted them, 3 alien figures in dark armor. Definitely not the same species as their injured friend. These had to be the Vorthak forces he'd been briefed about. They found the crash site, he reported to his team. Looks like 3 scouts, possibly more behind them. Sir, we could still pull out, Lisa suggested from her position. Leave the alien and extract while we can. Morrison looked back at Carter, who was still working frantically to stabilize their patient. The alien soldier was watching the whole scene unfold, clearly understanding that these humans were about to fight to protect him. That's when it hit Morrison. This wasn't just about saving one wounded soldier. This was about what kind of people they were, what humanity stood for when faced with impossible choices. Negative, he said firmly. We don't leave wounded behind. Not our people, not anybody's people. The first laser blast scorched the rock just inches from Danny's head. The enemy scouts had spotted them. Contact. We're compromised. Danny shouted, returning fire with his plasma rifle. The battle erupted with sudden violence. Laser beams and plasma bolts lit up the canyon as both sides exchanged fire. Morrison's team was outnumbered and outgunned, but they had better cover in the rocks around the crash site. Kefvar, despite his injuries, watched the firefight with complete amazement. These strange bipedal creatures, whom Coalition intelligence had dismissed as primitive newcomers to galactic civilization, were actually fighting to protect him. They could have escaped easily, could have followed their orders and avoided the conflict entirely. Instead, they chose to fight. For the first time in his long military career, Kefvar witnessed something he'd never seen before. Soldiers from one species risking their lives for a complete stranger from another species. It went against every military doctrine he'd ever learned, every tactical principle he'd been taught. But somehow, it felt absolutely right. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity. Morrison checked his watch. 6 hours had passed since the first shot was fired. 6 brutal hours of constant fighting under the scorching alien sun. The Vorthak forces had called in reinforcements twice, but Morrison's small team held their ground around the crashed ship. Kefvar slipped in and out of consciousness throughout the fight. Each time he opened his eyes, he saw something that amazed him more than the last. These humans fought with determination he'd never witnessed before. They weren't fighting for territory or resources or strategic advantage. They were fighting for him, a complete stranger from another world. During one of his clearer moments, Kefvar watched Private Danny Brooks duck behind a large boulder as enemy fire peppered the rocks around him. Danny was young, maybe the same age as Kefvar's own offspring back home. The human soldier's face was streaked with sweat and dust, but his hands remained steady as he returned fire. "Danny, fall back to position 2. Morrison shouted over the noise of battle. But as Danny moved to a new position, a Vorthak grenade exploded nearby. The young soldier cried out in pain as metal fragments tore into his shoulder and arm. He stumbled and fell behind a cluster of rocks, his rifle clattering away across the ground. Kefvar expected what would happen next. In any coalition army, the wounded soldier would be left where he fell. The mission came first. Individual casualties were acceptable losses. Resources couldn't be wasted on soldiers who could no longer fight effectively. But that's not what happened. Corporal Lisa Martinez immediately broke from her defensive position and sprinted toward Danny's location. Laser blasts sizzled through the air around her as she zigzagged between the rocks. She reached the wounded soldier and quickly assessed his injuries. "I've got you, kid," she said, pressing a field bandage against the worst of Danny's wounds. Nobody gets left behind. Without hesitation, she grabbed Danny under his good arm and began dragging him back toward the protective circle around Kefvar. Enemy fire followed them every step of the way. A laser bolt singed Martinez's uniform, missing her by inches. Sergeant Ben Carter provided covering fire, while Morrison helped pull both soldiers into safety. Within minutes, they had Danny positioned next to Kefvar, both wounded soldiers now protected in the center of the defensive perimeter. "How bad is it?" Morrison asked, checking Danny's wounds. "I'll live," Danny grunted through gritted teeth. "Just hurts like hell." Carter began treating Danny's injuries with the same care he'd shown Kefvar earlier. The human medic split his attention between both patients, monitoring their conditions and adjusting their treatments as needed. As the day wore on, Kefvar observed behavior that completely contradicted everything he knew about military tactics. The humans shared their precious water supplies with him, even though their own reserves were running dangerously low. When Carter noticed Kefvar's breathing becoming labored, he immediately adjusted the alien's position to help him breathe easier. "His pulse is getting weaker," Carter reported to Morrison. "Whatever passes for blood pressure in a species, it's dropping." Morrison actually left his fighting position to check on Kefvar personally. In the middle of a battle, with enemies trying to kill them all, the human commander took time to comfort a wounded alien soldier. As night began to fall, Morrison gathered his team for a quick assessment. Their ammunition was running critically low. They'd used most of their medical supplies. The Vorthak forces showed no signs of withdrawing. "Sir, we could try to extract after dark," Lisa suggested quietly. "Leave the alien and make a run for it." Kefvar understood enough of their language to follow the conversation. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. when these humans would finally show their true nature and abandon him to save themselves. Negative, Morrison replied without hesitation. We all leave together or nobody leaves. Carter nodded in agreement. The alien's condition is stabilizing. If we can keep him warm through the night, he might make it. Danny, despite his own injuries, actually volunteered to take first watch so the others could rest. I can still shoot left-handed, he insisted. As darkness settled over the canyon, the 4 humans maintained a protective circle around both wounded soldiers. They took turns on watch, shared their remaining food rations, and constantly checked on their patients' conditions. Kethvar stared up at the alien stars, trying to process what he was witnessing. These humans had given up multiple opportunities to escape. They'd risked their lives repeatedly for someone who wasn't even their own species. They'd shared their limited resources and shown him more care than he'd received from his own military command. Finally, he managed to whisper a single word in broken standard, the common language used across the galaxy. Why? Morrison looked down at him with tired but kind eyes. Because it's the right thing to do. The simple honesty of that answer shook Kethvar to his core. In all his years as a soldier, no one had ever given him such a straightforward explanation for an act of courage. These humans didn't need complex military justifications or strategic reasons. They helped because helping was right. The first rays of dawn painted the canyon walls orange and red. Morrison had barely slept, taking most of the watch shift himself to let his wounded soldiers rest. Kethvar's breathing had stabilized during the night, though he remained weak. Danny was doing better, joking quietly with Carter about the scars he'd have to show off when they got home. That's when they heard it. The distant rumble of human aircraft approaching fast. Cavalry's coming, Morrison said with relief, speaking into his radio. This is Recon 7. We have wounded and need immediate medical extraction. Copy that, 7. We've got 2 medical transports and a full escort. Hold tight. Within minutes, the canyon filled with a roar of engines as human dropships descended. A full platoon of Marines secured the area, while medical teams rushed to both wounded soldiers. Kethvar watched in amazement as the human medics worked on him with the same urgency and care they showed Danny. What's a species? Asked Dr. Rachel Webb, the lead field surgeon. No idea, Carter replied, but he's been stable all night. I used standard human treatments, and they seem to work. Dr. Webb nodded approvingly. Good job, Sergeant. You probably saved his life. During the flight to the medical facility, Kethvar found himself on the same transport as Danny. The young human soldier was joking with the medical staff, already planning his recovery, when he noticed Kethvar watching him. Danny actually smiled and gave him a thumbs up. Don't worry, big guy, Danny said. These docs are the best in the galaxy. You're going to be fine. Kethvar didn't understand all the words, but the meaning was clear. Even injured and in pain, this human was trying to comfort him. At the medical station, Kethvar learned something that shocked him even more than the rescue itself. While recovering in the hospital ward, he overheard conversations between human medical staff that revealed this wasn't unusual behavior for their species. Remember that Zelati merchant ship we found last month? One nurse mentioned to another. Captain Rodriguez risked his entire crew to save those civilians. Or that time Lieutenant Park's unit carried those wounded Kethari soldiers for 12 miles through enemy territory, replied the other. Command was furious, but the Kethari still sent thank you messages. Dr. Webb, who was monitoring Kethvar's recovery, noticed his obvious interest in these conversations. She spoke to him through a translation device they'd managed to acquire. You seem surprised by our behavior, she observed kindly. Through the translator, Kethvar managed to respond. In coalition military, individual soldiers are expendable assets. We do not risk many for one. Dr. Webb sat down beside his bed. That must be a very lonely way to fight a war. It is efficient, Kethvar replied, though for the first time in his life, the word fell hollow. 3 weeks later, Kethvar was transferred to a coalition medical facility for final treatment before returning to his unit. His injuries had healed remarkably well, thanks largely to the immediate care the humans had provided. But the mental impact of his experience was far deeper than any physical wound. When his commanding officer, General Faxmore, visited him in the medical bay, Kefvar knew he had to file a complete report. Military regulations demanded it, but he also knew this report would be unlike anything the Coalition had ever received. The humans fought for 6 hours to protect me, Kefvar explained to his general. They used their own medical supplies, shared their water and food, and refused multiple opportunities to escape. General Faxmore's 3 eyes narrowed with confusion. Perhaps they wanted information from you? No, sir. They asked nothing. When I asked why they helped, their leader said simply, because it is the right thing to do. The general stared at Kefvar for a long moment. In 30 years of military service, he'd never heard such an explanation for tactical decisions. Kefvar's official report sent shockwaves through Coalition command structures across 12 star systems. Military analysts spent weeks trying to understand how any species could function with such seemingly inefficient priorities. How could humans win battles if they valued individual lives over strategic objectives? But the more they studied human military history, the more confused they became. Humans did win battles. They won them consistently, often against superior numbers and better technology. Their inefficient approach to warfare somehow produced remarkable results. Word of the report spread beyond military circles. Civilian leaders, scientists, and philosophers throughout the galaxy began discussing these strange humans who would rather die than abandon someone in need. Some called it primitive emotion. Others began wondering if it might be the most advanced military thinking in the galaxy. The Coalition's cold calculations of acceptable losses suddenly seemed barbaric when compared to humanity's simple philosophy: leave no one behind. For the first time in galactic history, other species began questioning whether their military doctrines were actually superior or just different. Kefvar returned to active duty, but he was a changed soldier. Every time his own commanders wrote off casualties as acceptable losses, he remembered Morrison's words. Every time he saw wounded comrades left behind for tactical reasons, he thought about Danny's smile and Carter's gentle care. The universe was a vast and often cruel place. But somewhere in that darkness, there was a species that believed every life mattered. And that belief, Kefvar realized, made them stronger than any weapon.